My son wanted to know that I need a wheelchair. They tell me I'm the oldest Baha'i living today, and I believe it. And you, I'm 85 years old. And I wanted to come because I had a very important thing that happened to me when I came to Fort Wayne, 1963. There was I was just married, and of course in those days, you know, you were young, and my husband wooed me with the song, "We're Too Young." They tell us we're too young. We ended up having 4 kids while I was here in Fort Wayne. But this was an important place in my life because this is where my husband was born. Buford Williams was his name, and most of you are not even old enough to remember him. And I had 3 of my children were born here. My parents lived here. His parents lived here. But more important than any other thing, I found Baha'u'llah. I want to digress a bit to tell you a story, because when I was a kid, you always were taken to the little Sunday school and you were taught the fundamentals of Christianity. And one of the stories that my mom always told me was that there was a heaven. And then one day I happened to look in the book, and there was another place you could go that wasn't so pleasant. So she would say, you know, sins will take you there. I was so concerned about my dad because he didn't seem to have any. He didn't go to church. And one day he was out there in the field, and Mom had said, that's a sin to work on Sunday. So I ran out to the field. I was about 5 years old. And I said, Daddy, you can't work it Sunday. He pulled me up on his lap, and I never will forget. I'm closer to God here in this field than you are in the church. From that moment on, I went to Daddy for many of the questions that I had, and there were many. And one day I ran across a story, I'll tell you, because maybe it'll explain even better than my words. There was a young private who was told to take a captain to a nearby army base. So when the captain came out, he climbed up in the Jeep with his with the soldier, and he said, "Do you know where you're going?" He said, "Yes, sir. I know where I'm going." So they started on down the road. A little while, the private pulled over to the side, and the captain said, "I say there, young man, do you know where you're going?" "Yes, sir. I know where we're going. I just don't know how to get there." And I thought, that was my problem. I knew that I wanted to go to that place that Mama told me about. That place that was beautiful, clouds, and there was streets lined in gold, and oh, it was beautiful. But daggone it, I didn't know how to get there. So anyway, Daddy had always told me to be very independent in my thinking, always to check things out. So as a result, I tried to find out which was the way to go. I went to different churches. I tried every way I knew to find the way. And finally, I gave up. I decided I know there's a God, because all those times when he would talk to me when we were in the field, I watched the nature, the way God created all those beautiful trees and the birds. And I loved to watch the ants, to raise a rock and to see how they all would get together and gather that's the way the Baha'is are. We get together, don't we? And those ants were a wonderful lesson. The bees even I thought was really neat. So as a result, I said, I'll just wait one day and I'll find out. I'll find it. Maybe I'll find it. I prayed. And Daddy said, be patient. He had so much wisdom. He was a graduate from Kentucky State. In those days, it was not usual for black people to have a college education, but his mother worked for stayed on this plantation that she had worked for, and he sent Daddy to school because he recognized his ability. And one of the things that Daddy always said, get your education. And always, always, independently investigate truth for yourself. So as a result, I went on and went to college, but I ran into this young man, and that did change my plans. I came up to Fort Wayne one day with my friend who had won a contest in speaking, and I heard a voice from outside in the hallway, and all of you are too young to know who my husband was, but he sang, and the song he sang was, "Oh, walk with me through the heat of the day." And that song just, the acoustics were so beautiful. He was able to touch my heart. And when I went back to school, we began to court. And it wasn't long before that love bug took over. We were able to finish that second year, but we got married. And in those days, you just kind of did what you wanted to do. Nobody was asked. We just did it. But we moved to Fort Wayne, and my husband went into the service for 2 years, and we tried to be together, but every time I'd go to where he was, it was always difficult. The accommodations were poor in those Army bases. So anyway, when he got out of the service, didn't he get into entertainment? And that was not my plan at all, because my idea was having a nice little home with a picket fence. And by this time, we had 2 children already. My dad, who lived in Richmond, Indiana, I think saw my problem. And they decided to come to Fort Wayne. He built a home there in 1956. It was a duplex. So we moved in on one side, and I think he thought, well, I'll help. I can help with the children. Mama got a job as a private cook, and Daddy did odd jobs around town building. Now, he had so many things he could do. He was a teacher at one time. He he was a professor of high school there in Winchester. And he was just so good at so many things, but he seemed to always want to go back to the farm. So I think that he always missed that, and he wanted to. But he came to Fort Wayne, and I think he came because of me. One day he came home from from getting my mother, and he was just really lifted up. And I said, well, what happened? He said, this maid told me to go to this fireside, and I went last night. A fireside? What's that? He said, they told me about a religion, the Baha'i faith. I said, what? I'd never heard of such a thing. At first I thought, now, Daddy, I loved my daddy. Oh, anybody that knew him knew that he was the most wonderful soul. But he didn't know all the answers. But anyway, he told me, you've got to come. You've got to come to a meeting. So the next day, they had a fireside. Now, I do remember Fred Sudhoff. Now, I know most of you don't remember him. And Henry Hall, I remember him. Now remember, I'm home with these 3 children by that time. Yeah, by the time Buford came back, I had 3 kids, and I was anemic, sickly, and I was home all the time, so I didn't get around to see people. But I didn't join the faith when I first came. So at any rate, Fred and Henry came that next night, and there wasn't one of those questions, not one of those things that I had wondered about, that had kept me in the dark, that he didn't answer. And I thought about that story of that private. I knew where I wanted to go, but I didn't know how to get there. But after that night, I knew Baha'u'llah was the way. And I remembered only one thing that just stood out. Was the time I had taken my youngest daughter to see about her eyes. The teacher had sent a note and said she had noticed that she was having difficulty seeing. So I took her to the eye doctor, and I remember when the doctor found the proper prescription for her, she looked out the window, and she turned back to me, and her little face was beaming with light. And she said, "Oh, Mommy, it's a brand new day." And that is just exactly how I felt when I heard about Baha'u'llah. It's a brand new day. So when I became a Baha'i, we were telling everybody. My dad, in fact, I bet he's here today. But that man, I think, one time I came home, they had gotten blind. He was on the radio. He was telling people about the faith, and if you went to visit him, he would have a book for you to pick up and read. He wanted to know all about it. So, as a result of his insistence on me being independent in thinking, I took my time, though, even after I knew. The next week, I think it was, we went out to it was a public meeting. I think Lydia Schott had a meeting, and I think she lived in the country. And the speaker, after he got through, said, "Are there any questions?" Daddy jumps up out of his seat, and he said, "Yes, I have a question. How do you get to be a Baha'i?" I believed the first time I heard it. Well, see, Daddy had already told us all about all those principles and things. He knew it himself, so he didn't have to go through all the way most of us do to find these truths. But I said, I've got to find out more for myself. So Fred came over, and he and Henry, they studied and deepened with me, and I studied and deepened. And after a few sessions, Fred came in and he says, "Do you believe in Baha'u'llah?" Yes, I do. He said, "Do you believe in Abdul Baha?" "Yes, I do." And he said, and I said, "I believe in the Baha'i faith." He said, "Why haven't you joined?" I said, "Well, I read somewhere where Abdul Baha said he is a true Baha'i who strives by day and by night to progress and advance along the path of human endeavor, who's most cherished." And he goes on, and at the end it says, "Only until he acquires such perfect gifts can it be said of him that he is a true Baha'i, for in this holy dispensation, the crown and glory of bygone ages and cycles, true faith is no mere acknowledgement of the unity of God, but the living of a life that will manifest all the virtues and perfections." So I said to myself, I'm not ready yet. I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. He patted me on my back, and he smiled, and he said, "If you're waiting for that, you'll never be a Baha'i." because none of us are good enough, but we can all strive to be better. So I joined right away. It was in the fall of 1957 that I signed my card. We used to visit my folks in Kentucky a lot. And I remember the first time we went down there and we stopped in Paris where my father's mother lived. And Daddy left her a book. And the next time we went to visit her in a month or so, she was still reading that book, and they didn't have electricity, so she was sitting at her desk, and there was an oil lamp sitting beside her, and she was humped over there reading this book, and she was so happy. She said, "Oh, I'm so glad about this." Now, you know what? I always thought I was a second generation Baha'i, but daggone it, I think I'm third, because grandmother, if I hadn't had a card, we were too young, we didn't know about the proper procedure, but she believed in Baha'u'llah. And I want you to know that has made the biggest difference in my life. Buford and I had 5 children, all became Baha'is. 10 grandchildren, all became Baha'is. 11 great-grandchildren, only one old enough to declare, but he's a Baha'i. But that one soul, and I say I may be the oldest one that's declared in Fort Wayne, but my dad, I give honors to him because he was the one that ingrained in us the idea of being independent in our thinking and to live the life. And all of our families. And I know Josie, my sister Josephine, she has, in fact, there's 2. Stand up, you Josephine children. She's got 2 of them here today. And then there's Gladys, who was living here. She died 2 years ago, but she's got some children. There's a daughter there, Marcia Smiley, and her children. I don't even know how many Baha'is. We have so many Baha'is in the family, I lost count. It is so hard to keep track because they just keep coming. But I want you to know that, when I first became a Baha'i, I thought everybody would hear this and they would immediately say, "I believe." But that wasn't the case. But I can tell you one thing, that if we live the life in a way, we will eventually draw people to Baha'u'llah. I had a neighbor once, it was so funny. She lived across the street and her husband was a minister, and she came to one of our meetings. And at the end, I said, "So you think I'm going to go to hell? Is that what you think?" And he said, "Yes." Next morning, about 6 o'clock, somebody's knocking at the door. She knew I didn't get up that early, but she came and said, "Honey, why are you here?" She says, "I want to be a Baha'i." And I said, "You don't know enough about it." But she says, "I love all of the Baha'is," and said, "If you're going to hell, I want to go with you." When in 1963, I went to the first Baha'i World Congress in London, England. And I wish I could tell you what all went on there. But somehow I do think I had an out-of-body experience, because when I watched all of those 8,000 Baha'is from all over the world coming into that auditorium, it was round, this was beautiful round building with all of these people, with all of these different outfits on, I just heard a voice that said, "Many sheep have I that are not of this fold. Them too shall I gather in that day." And I tell you, I saw all of those people coming, and I know It won't be long. We have to be patient. We have to keep teaching. We have to keep living. But I knew that one day all of God's children will be gathered together. And as I looked around that hall, I couldn't hear anything but that voice that kept repeating, them too shall I gather in that day.